Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it's September the 30th, a Tuesday. New Books Day. About 5, almost 6 years ago, I did a very good show, I thought, not because of me, but because of my guest, but also a very depressing one with one of America's leading nonfiction writers, Sam Quinones, who at that time, back in 2021, in November, had a new book out called The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. Many of you will also be familiar with Sam's book, Dreamland, on Amazon. It's almost got 10,000 5-star ratings, quite an achievement. Best-selling book, won all sorts of awards. And I'm thrilled that Sam is back with a new book, but it's a book I would never have guessed he would have written, given his track record of writing about American opioid epidemics of one kind or another. His new book, which is out today, is called The Perfect Tuba, Forging Fulfillment from the Bass Horn, Band, and Hard Work. And Sam is joining us from Nashville in Tennessee, where he moved from Los Angeles for a time. He's going to move back to Los Angeles. Sam, I don't always pick on writers in terms of their weird narratives, but is it a fair question to ask how you got from The Least of Us, a book about America in the time of fentanyl and meth, to a book about The Perfect Tuba?
Sure, it's a very fair question, and it's kind of my own trek. In fact, it goes farther back than that. It goes back to the Dreamland book, and about the time I was working on the Dreamland book, or began working on the Dreamland book, I also did a couple of stories for the LA Times about the tuba in Mexican LA, and this would have been 2011 or 12, something around in there. And the tuba is the instrument in Mexican LA. I found that story really heartwarming, really wonderful, and when it came out, band directors began calling me and said, yeah, that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true what you write, and you know, all our tubas have been getting stolen. So I wrote another story a month later about tubas being stolen from these high schools in predominantly Mexican areas of LA because the tuba was so popular. And so that then led me to kind of follow my inner journalist, inner hunch, because when you find people who are doing things for the pure love of it, they almost always lead to a great story. And the tuba player, I began to interview tuba players all across the country at this point, and I began to realize, you know, I don't play the tuba. I was never in marching band, which is where most tuba players start, but I found something beautiful about what they were doing, and that is that they were practicing something, they were working towards something because of what it showed them they could do, that their own capabilities. It showed them their own possibilities. They were doing this without really the promise of money or fame or any of that kind of thing. It was more like they found something that really inspired them. At the same time, I was writing about heroin addiction and the opioid epidemic, my Dreamland book, and then that transitioned to another book, the one that you mentioned that we talked about several years ago, The Least of Us, with fentanyl and meth being the prime characters in that book. And along the way, though, I kept on working on this book about tuba players, in part because it was kind of like the antidote to what I was writing as well. You know, about the drugs and drug addiction. Drug addiction is really this pursuit of happiness, I guess you might call it, from something you buy. Tuba players, band directors too, were about finding that fulfillment from something you create within. And I thought that was beautiful. And after finishing those two books about drug epidemics in America, I really thought to myself, I can't write another book. I'm kind of worn out. Needed a break for sure. And I thought to myself, this tuba idea might work. And I credit to Bloomsbury Press. They dove into it. They said, "Oh yeah, go for it." And I just spent the last 2 years trying to fashion a lot of the interviews that I had done and others that I still left to do into a book. It was because I was worn out by this grueling, kind of grim story of people searching for something that will make them happy if they buy it and use it, and really ends up most of the time killing them.
Yeah, makes them supposed to make them happy, but of course makes them profoundly miserable and everyone around them. It's a wonderful story in itself, Sam. Describe the tuba, especially to someone perhaps who's never heard it. What kind of sound does it produce? Why is it such, for you at least, such a distinctive musical instrument?
Well, it is the lowest in any band or symphony orchestra. It's the lowest register instrument. It is without the tuba, the band does not sound much like a band. You can't really have a solid foundation for any band without the tuba. And it's an instrument that is it's the youngest instrument in the brass world. It was invented in 1835 and is still being tinkered with. And that's one of the interesting things. Trumpets are kind of very, they're kind of set in stone in a sense. Tubas they're fat, they're short, they're thin, they're tall. They're like human beings. They come in all shapes.
At least according to Wikipedia, its patent was granted in September 1835 to a Prussian bandmaster.
Right, and that instrument has been modified and transformed and changed in many, many ways. There's now several kinds of tubas, depending on the key, this kind of thing, and depending on that also on the length of the tube that bends and twists. And so there are many different kinds of tubas now. They're made by many different companies. The Chinese are really big in it now. But it has, when played right, one of the remarkable things about the tuba is its ability to kind of shake your bones. Really, that's the amazing thing. And it starts, it starts with this unpleasant, wet buzzing, your lips against a metal mouthpiece. And then it goes through all those tubes, those hairpin turns and those straightaways and those detours and everything to come out the bell, this enormous sound that just shakes the bone. And that is really key to why people, I think, fall in love with it and spend so much time without any promise of fame or wealth. As I said, spend so much time learning it and perfecting it and really fully getting into it and finding their own passion through all that hard work, through that perseverance, through failure, because it's a remarkable sound that creates in the orchestra, but also in the body of the person making it.
You're in Nashville. I'm guessing that the tuba is used quite often in jazz music. Also in New Orleans, I'm guessing. You came to it through Los Angeles and perhaps your Mexican heritage. And of course, as I said, it was originally invented in early 19th century Prussia, so it lent itself to classical music. Are there particular kinds of music that the tuba lends itself to, or is it quite adaptable, which explains why it's as popular perhaps in Los Angeles as it is in New Orleans, as it is in Berlin?
It's as adaptable as any other instrument, in my opinion, in the orchestra, as a trumpet, a trombone, what have you, violins, etc. I mean, to me, it depends on where you grew up with it, what you learned, how you learned to play it, the other people around you at the time you were learning. Now, most people learn it, take it up. Unlike all those other instruments I mentioned, most people take up the tuba well into their life. They're usually 13 or 14 because your lungs simply aren't capable of pushing the air in the quantities that will be needed for the tuba until you're about that age. Whereas with the piano or the violin or the trumpet, you can start a lot earlier. So it's usually in the United States, it's usually through marching band The interesting thing is, I think, is that nobody really chooses the tuba. You're
The
pushed into the
tuba chooses you. And
right.
I've never heard of a tuba soloist. Of course, we've heard of many violin and pianist, viola and cello soloists. But is there such a thing as a tuba soloist, or by definition, does the tuba need to be played within an orchestra or band?
Certainly, it's been played mostly as the foundation as a community enhancer. A good tuba player will bring the symphony together, will bring the band together. But there now are many tuba soloists. Some of them are full-time soloists. Probably the most important one is Øystein Badsvik, who is Norwegian and has been doing this for a long, long time. It's also the move towards more complicated music for the tuba and soloing is part of what I call the Tuba Civil Rights Movement. And that
Wow.
tuba has always been at the back of the band, not just physically, because that's probably where it needs to be, but also figuratively in a sense, so that people always view it as like this limited instrument and not capable of much, and therefore tuba players themselves are not capable of much. This has been something that tuba players have rebelled against now for many, many, many years, and the expression of tuba soloists and much more complicated music written for the tuba is kind of where the whole instrument has been heading now for since the 60s at least, but certainly gaining a lot of strength in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah, I like this phrase, Tuba Civil Rights Movement. Maybe we'll use that in the headline. Given that you're particularly interested in Latin culture, you're from Mexico. You're from certainly Latin Los Angeles, and you're originally from Latin America. Is there a quality of the civil rights movement when it comes to the cultural way in which the tuba has been used, particularly in Los Angeles?
Well, first of all, I'm not from I'm American, and my grandfather was from Spain. I spent years.
Whoops! You're still going to talk to me. I apologize, Sam.
That's okay.
I made some generalizations because of your name, Quinones.
And also that I lived in Mexico, and my first two books were about
that. Yeah, so I do have an excuse for confusing you.
It's a common mistake. I would say, though, the interesting thing that I first got me onto all this was the story of Chalino Sanchez. Chalino Sanchez was a singer, underground singer in Mexican LA from the state of Sinaloa, the center of drug trafficking. He developed a career for himself, very DIY, very much like the punk rockers and the rappers just found their own kind of music without record companies back then. This would have been in the late 80s, early 90s, singing songs about shootouts in the little villages where so many Mexican immigrants come from, particularly in the state of Sinaloa. He used a style of group known as the banda. Banda music in Mexico is very, very popular, and it's really dance music played by marching band instruments. So snare drum, clarinet, trumpet, and the tuba is the bedrock instrument of that music. Many Mexican American kids viewed banda music as totally corny parent music. We want rap, we want other stuff, until Chalino came along. And Chalino wrote songs that all of a sudden made the tuba kind of cool and dangerous. In fact, he himself was murdered after a show in 1992 when he went back to Mexico. He had left Mexico having murdered a guy who had tried to attack his sister, and lived up in the LA area for quite a long time, made his underground career, and then by a great mistake accepted a gig back in Mexico where he was murdered. But Chalino's part in all this is as this renegade underground singer for Mexican immigrants, and particularly Mexican kids growing up in LA. And with that, he turned the tuba into this hugely popular instrument. Now, all these kids would bump tuba-based banda music from their trucks as they drove down the retail areas, the business areas of these these communities outside Los Angeles, these suburbs where it was so Mexican by now. And you'd see these trucks passing by, and boom, boom, and you'd hear the tuba, you'd hear the banda music, and all the girls would think that was cool, you know. So Chalino transformed. I'd written about him before. I'd written about him in my first book, but I included him in this one as well because I felt that his role in all this was enormous, and really why a lot of Mexican kids growing up in LA, having been brought to the United States maybe when they were 2 or 5 or whatever, became more Mexican almost after Chalino, because they kind of got back in touch with some of their Mexican roots. A lot of times all they were really listening to by then was rap music, because it was also invented around that time. But to me, that was this amazing story. And then that led to this enormous popularity of the tuba in Mexican LA as a way of displaying how well people had done in America. You know, if you have a party for your daughter's 50th birthday or wedding or what have you, and you have a band with an enormous big gold sousaphone tuba, it's just a way of saying I came to the United States extraordinarily poor, and look how far I've come. And that was really another big reason why the tuba was so important in Mexican LA, I found.
Yeah, that's really a fascinating story, and I know you're also a photographer on your website. You have some great photos of people playing the tuba and other images. We're all familiar, of course, Sam, with Wim Wenders' great movie Paris, Texas, which is premised on the idea that no one's really ever heard of Paris, Texas. I'd never heard of Roma, Texas, but that features in your book on the tuba. What's the connection between Roma, Texas, and the tuba?
Well, at a certain point in the story, what I was really interested in was writing about people who were finding fulfillment from what they created themselves. And along the way, I began to realize that band directors, too. Band directors, as one band director said, band directors are just like tuba players, just on a larger scale. And so I thought, actually, you know, all of them are creating cohesion. They're creating community. That's what band directors do. That's what tuba players do. And they do so without any promise of fame or fortune. They are not looking for quick fixes to anything. It's all about hard work. And I just grew enamored with the idea that these two occupations, so to speak, were so really ignored and yet so important to creating the values that sustain community in America. And along the way, I began to realize that one of the great bands in the state of Texas, which is as crazy for marching band as it is for high school football, which is saying a lot in that state, one of the great bands competing with the wealthiest communities all across Texas was the little town of Roma, Texas, one of the poorest towns in Texas, along the Rio Grande Valley, along the Rio Grande River, in what's known as the Rio Grande Valley. And I wanted to understand why that was. And so I went to Roma, and there I met the guy who had transformed the band world. He was a tuba instructor, a guy named Al Cortinas, and Al's innovation was to say, we have kids, as one band director said, the kids of our kids here are competing with kids across Texas who take lessons from symphony players. These kids, our kids, don't have any money for music lessons. So how are we going to transform them into state level musicians without private music lessons? And it was Al Cortinas' system, bringing in a variety of elements, largely convincing his school district that they needed to hire more band directors and let each band director teach one instrument to kids from 6th grade on up to 12th. It was a remarkable innovation, but what it did was it created the band culture in Roma, but also in other towns in the Rio Grande Valley, that allowed them only a few years later to go from musically illiterate to competing in the finals with bands from the tech very, very wealthy tech suburbs of Austin, Texas, the state capital, or from Dallas, Fort Worth. It was a remarkable story of just one guy's innovation, and then others have continued it. He's retired for a while now, but others have continued it. And Roma, Texas continues to compete head to head with the best bands in Texas because of this innovation that allowed the value, the inner hidden jewels that these kids were to be cultivated. And to me, that was another just like gorgeous, one of these gorgeous stories, of which there are many. I fell in love with all these stories in my book. Honest to God, it was a real amazing thing that went on. But the Roma story is absolutely one of them, of how one guy comes along and figures out, if we try something else, we are letting all this talent go to waste. It's all there. It needs to be burnished. It needs to be cultivated. And his system put in place there allows Roma, Texas to be the competitor that it is today in statewide band championships.
Yeah, well, Roma, Texas now is known alongside Paris, Texas. The subtitle of the book, Sam, is Forging Fulfillment from the Bass Horn Band and Hard Work. Where you're talking about it, though, the term American Dream appears in too many book titles and subtitles these days. In a sense, you're presenting it as a feature, a manifestation, a reflection of the American Dream. Is that fair?
I would say there's something to that, sure. And the beauty of it is that we are so captivated by the idea that we all need to find our passion for something or another. And I certainly have found mine in journalism. But the truth is, you don't find your passion. You forge a passion. And that's only made through hard work. You learn to do something so well and you love that you can do it. And that creates in you this feeling like, God, I want to do it more. I want to get better. I want to see what other challenges I can face and meet with this one activity. And to me, that was, and I thought that it had, moreover, the tuba and band directors had something to say to a country drowning, if you ask me, in a malaise of drug addiction, but also kind of babbling distraction and this bursts of the outrage of dopamine's outrage. We are crushing ourselves. We are shattering ourselves through this. And I think the tuba and band directors had something to say about what we really are as Americans. We are not about crushing the other side and hating and anonymously insulting people. The tuba and band directors have a lesson for how we forge fulfillment, how we forge contentment, not looking for something that would provide us pleasure, temporary pleasure from something we buy, but rather a more long-lasting contentment of what we have been able to achieve. And it comes with hard work. It comes with perseverance through failure. It comes with patience and focus. It comes, above all, with collaboration with others. It's the opposite of addiction. We have a highly addictive economy now with drug addiction and all the rest, but also many, many services and products that are so potent and so addictive, gambling and all the rest. And to me, this was the great lesson, I guess, that I took from tuba players who were really looking to find what they were capable of. And that is the most potent narcotic we know, is when a young kid, 15, 17, 25, whatever, finds that this is something that he's able to do that nobody else, not even him, thought was.
Sam, is there a moral quality to this? You noted that some of the characters that you cover in the book were drug criminals of one kind or another. Have you found in the kind of characters that you portray and the people who reinvent themselves perhaps through the tuba that it changes them morally? I mean, might it be able to reform, so to speak, a criminal, or is that the wrong way of asking the question?
I think that's probably the wrong way of going about it, asking it. But one guy told me, one band director said, it's, for example, one of the schools I wrote about, they had a high school dropout rate of 66%. gangs, drugs, teen pregnancy, poor people, migrant workers moving and that kind of thing. But in band, the graduation rate was 100%. Talked to a lot of the band kids 20 years later. They were doing really, really well. They had wonderful family lives. They had very strong professional lives. The truth is that band does that far more than athletics. Athletics, football and basketball, they get all the applause and the glory. But the real great, beautiful values and habits and approaches to life and outlooks on life are taught in band. It means by that I mean, in band you learn that just because you're good at something doesn't mean that people are just going to fall and bow down to you. You still have to work hard at it. You still and that just because you play an instrument doesn't make you kind of the king of the campus. And these are wonderful things. It's also about finding ways of working really hard with precision and detail towards something, and taking then joy, the really great joy in small accomplishments. That's really how we as humans find fulfillment. It's not the big magic answer. It's not the big blast of dopamine. It's little steps forward, very often with other people. But either way, it's these little steps forward, and it's finding that joy, getting used to life being a series of setbacks, but then finally you keep at it and you move forward. And that is a radical idea I hold. That's a radical idea to a lesson for a country that's up to its neck in drug addiction and addiction to all these other things that are so toxic in our culture right now.
Yeah, it's the collaborative nature that you noted earlier. I know my wife was in her college band, and she swears that it changed her life too. A few years ago, I had my friend Maria Ressa on the show. She won the Nobel Prize for Peace. She's a journalist and a free speech activist. I'm sure, as you know, from the Philippines. She worked for CNN, many other news organizations. I remember asking her what democracy sounded like, and she said to me it sounded orchestral, in the sense that it sounded like a collaboration. What does your book, Sam, tell us about democracy in America? You noted that America now is addicted to all sorts of things, which is undermining it. There's also, of course, a crisis of democracy. Are there lessons for rebuilding, reinventing democracy in America in the 21st century in the perfect tuba?
It might be. There might be. And through the tuba and band, what you find is people of all kinds coming together with one goal, and also not very strong feeling of not wanting to let everybody else down. There's that feeling of I'm in a community, I'm together with people, and I better keep up. I better be accountable. I better keep up my side of the bargain. And more than anything, though, I think it's because it's what happens through tuba and the band is that you develop the qualities that sustain your community later. They always say, how'd your band do, this year? Well, it's too early to say. Give me 10 years. And I'll tell you how the kids turned out, and then we'll know how the band how good the band was, And I think there's really something to that. Your wife swears by it. I swear, you go through the communities that I've been through, and you find people, you scratch them a little bit, try to figure out a little bit their story. So often they were in band. It's such an essential part of.
Yeah, I wonder if you noted the collaborative quality. Does it? We live in a culture, again, it seems, Sam, where we're not very forgiving of other people's failures. We don't acknowledge our own. Does being in a band make you a little bit more forgiving of other people's failures and mistakes? Because it's whether it's the tuba or another instrument, it becomes quite self-evident.
Oh, I think so. And the other part of that is, as I said, you don't want to let everyone, you want to know your part. You want to be able to play your part as well as it can be played, because people will look at you and say, hey man, come on, you're slacking. And so all of that, whether you go into music or not, and most people who are in band do not go into music as a profession, but the qualities that you learn in band, the habits and the attitudes that you learn in band are so important for a successful individual life, but I hold too that they are so important for a community to retain. And part of what's bedeviling us as a country is that too often we get away from the values of tuba and band. We get away from the idea that we're all in this together. We all need to be accountable to each other instead of constantly bickering and finding fault and overlooking our own failures and missteps and so on. To me, it's one of the great things. I was not expecting this. You know, I wrote this story because I didn't want to write about addicts anymore. I want to write about people finding fulfillment from something else, they hard work and so on. I was not expecting to come to the conclusion that band and tuba players were somehow essential to the community cohesion in which in America we have lost a lot of. The stuff, I dare say some of what's holding us together is the stuff that so many kids learned in high school or a college band.
I know, Sam, you spent the last few years in Nashville. You moved from Los Angeles to give your daughter another view of America. Is perhaps one of the suggestions in the book that parents or teachers really focus on this thing? It doesn't mean that all kids need to learn the tuba, but playing in bands or any kind of collective, particularly musical experience, is of great value, not just to the individual, but to the community.
No, I think so. The point of the book is not to say we should all take up the tuba. The point of the book is to say you want your kids to flourish, push them into something that's hard. Don't let them get away with slacking. Don't give them endless praise for almost no accomplishment. Push them to find something that they want to work hard towards. And that can be anything. You could be a ceramics maker or whatever. You could be a great, burgeoning entrepreneur. It doesn't matter. What I think we've gotten away from is the lesson that tuba players learn because they have to, because no one's applauding them the way they do the quarterback at the football team or whatever. You have to find your way of being as good as possible without the entire world stopping and giving you a standing ovation. Right. And to me, that's a very healthy thing kids need to learn. The value of hard work, the value of persistence and perseverance.
But also it's a thing, Sam, as the parent of two kids who grew up on the soccer fields of Northern California. Sure. It's an important thing for parents to learn that their kids aren't always stars, that they can just be players in a band and they don't always have to win or be the top player on the team or get a medal.
I think that's 100% true. That's 100% true, and that your value doesn't diminish, but also, you need to stand up for your own part in this. You need to be accountable. That part of the story I think is extraordinarily important. It seems to me that the more our lives are governed by the babble of social media and all the rest and the distraction, we are losing part of that, and that is a very dangerous thing to lose, I should say, and we can learn a lot. Again, not expecting any of this kind of stuff, but when I started, but as I got done with the book, I realized we can learn so much from tuba players and band directors about how to create true fulfillment, true contentment and happiness, which is the absolute contrary of everything that American corporate marketing would tell us, which is
and there's a musical quality, both metaphorically and perhaps literally, of course, when we talk about the perfect tuba. It sounds like a very uplifting book on many fronts for you personally, Sam, politically and culturally. But I can't let you go as one of America's leading authorities on our drug epidemic. As I said, you're the author of Dreamland and The Least of Us, both award-winning books, both highly influential. Many people have read them. We haven't talked for 5 years. Where are we in terms of the so-called drug epidemic? Of course, we have a president who claims that all this is being caused by Central America. What's your overall narrative of the last 5 years when it comes to America's drug problem?
Well, certainly the supplies of the drugs that now dominate the drug world in America are coming from Mexico. There's no doubt about that. Fentanyl, methamphetamine. There's been a revolution in drug production down in Mexico where they no longer grow, but instead they make their drugs. The synthetic drugs made only with chemicals, and this is causing devastation across the country. It seems to me, not just drug addiction and death, but also mental illness, homelessness, and all that. So there's quite a good bunch of reasons why to feel very dour about the future when it comes to this stuff. On the other hand, I do believe that we are seeing in small scale movement forward, both primarily at the community level, the small town level, where you're finding towns beginning to move, to come together in ways that they had not for a long time. And that's really like the last chapter of The Least of Us is the town of Portsmouth, Ohio, which I had written about at great length in Dreamland. Now, in Least of Us, I talk about how Portsmouth, Ohio, Rust Belt town on the Ohio River across from Kentucky, is really moving dramatically forward in the smallest ways. Again, probably you could, it's going to sound strange, but using the very lessons that the tuba and band tuba players and band directors know to be true, which is the small steps towards improvement, beginning to bring everybody together who has like-minded about moving forward, getting away from drugs. And that's what you're finding in Portsmouth, Ohio, and many other towns that I've visited. So this is really, it's very strange, but it does tie into the tuba book in the sense that there's so many places out there that are kind of applying, with whether they know it or not, the lessons of the tuba and of marching band to how they move forward.
Finally, Sam, as I said, you're the author of a number of books about the opioid epidemic and of one kind of crime or another. What did this book teach you as a journalist about doing something completely different? Journalists tend to get pigeonholed. I've written a series of books on technology like you. I got sick of writing about technology, and my next book's going to be about something completely different. Was it a cathartic experience, or was it quite challenging also?
It was both. It was both, because I didn't know a thing. I don't play the tuba, never in marching band. I didn't know a thing about the tuba, but Tom Wolfe, great journalist, I think it was he who said, don't write about what you know, write about what you don't know, but you're going to find out all about. And that's been kind of my motto for all my journalism career. I wanted not to be pigeonholed. You're absolutely right. Journalists have a problem sometimes being pigeonholed by whatever they last did, and I wanted to move away from that quickly and decisively, and I wanted to challenge myself, and certainly this was a world I had no knowledge of, and it was that, but it was also this enormous, because it was like this small step, immersion through small steps into it, it was this wonderful feeling of being part of something that I had never known about, and now that I know about it, it was just like so intoxicating, and the stories themselves again just became my like, as they often do, became my little children almost. I just like adored them in a sense.
Yeah, stories like of Roma, Texas. What's next, Sam? I know you're moving back to LA. You're going to do a book on you back to drugs. What's your next book going to be about?
Well, I'm probably going to try. I'm going to write a biography of the fellow I talked to you about earlier, Chalino Sanchez. His quite an important person in Mexican music, but far beyond that, through his story, you can tell the story of the growth of drug trafficking out of Mexico. You can also tell the story of illegal immigration from Mexico and the transformation of major parts of Los Angeles. His story has become kind of very, very well known, and so I want to make sure and do right by him and his story. So that probably is going to be my next book. After.
Well, I hope it won't be another 5 years till we see you again. You're a very, very important voice in American journalism.
We'll see about that. I don't know. These things tend to kind of take over, and then it's like, oh my gosh,
Well,
Okay.
I guarantee you one thing. Next time I hear the tuba, I'll think of you. Sam Quinones, author of an intriguing new book, wonderfully refreshing, both in terms of his own career and perhaps where we're at in America. The Perfect Tuba. It's already the #1 release in horns on Amazon, which is quite an achievement. Sam, congratulations on the book. It's out today, and we'll talk again in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
Andrew, thank you so much for having me on. Really a pleasure once again.